Good
Welcome,
evening.
and thank you for joining us for this conversation in the I Am New Orleans conversation series. I am Devon, the Executive Director of Grow That Youth Farm. Grow That Youth Farm is first and foremost a youth leadership development organization. We operate a 7-acre farm in City Park, and over the course of the year, we harvest about 35,000 pounds of food that goes directly into New Orleans families and homes, residences, and we serve over 70 young people every year where they learn about sustainable agriculture, community leadership, and food justice. So it is an absolute pleasure for me to be in community with some of the people who are making our food systems go. As y'all know, New Orleans is known for its food, right? Food is New Orleans' gifts to the world. And that food makes us a culinary destination. A lot of people want to come here and eat the food. And we have local food systems that suffer from a host of challenges. And that's from food production to processing to distribution to access and consumption. So tonight we are here to talk about food and food systems. We're talking about all of the issues that the pandemics have highlighted for us, all of the challenges, and all of the ways that people, that we can uplift the people who have been doing the work of making sure we all get fed over this very trying year. So I'm here with a beautiful group of people. Before I introduce them, I want to tell you a little bit more about the I Am New Orleans project. For some of you who may not be familiar with the project, this is a year-long conversation series that is being led by the community to inspire conversation and action around critical issues of racial equity that impact our children. And so before we get started, I hope that everyone, as you are coming in, that you are seeing where folks are coming from. Please feel free to enter your name, a little bit about yourself, where you're calling us from, where you're calling in from, so that we can have a lively chat community going. This conversation is going to be translated into Vietnamese and Spanish. So closed captioning and translation services are available. You can access those options at the bottom of your screen. So if you need translation services, please go to the bottom of the screen where you can access those options. Again, please use the chat box. You know, we are all living a Zoom life. And for the past year, we have been trying to find ways to replicate being in community, trying to find the ways where we would be in person and there would be some call and response action happening. We'd be able to affirm what people are saying. We'd be able to raise our eyes and our hands and all those pieces. And while it's not impossible to do on Zoom, we rely very heavily on the chat box to do that on Zoom. So if you are hearing things that resonate with you as the panelists are talking, please enter that into the chat. If you have questions that come up, if you have comments that come up throughout the course of our conversation, this is a space for all of us to contribute. So please feel free to use the chat box for that function. Also, today's conversation is being recorded so that we can share all of the beauty and the inspiration that will come out of this conversation. We'll be able to share that online with additional resources after this program is ended. And also, if you are a socially oriented person, if you have a very live and active social media, I know people on this panel certainly do, use the hashtag I Am New Orleans. And that's going to help us keep the conversation going because again, this is a space for us. This is a platform for us to start or to continue the work that we have been doing. And lastly, again, this is a call to action, so please go into your social media accounts, share your food-related stories because we want to hear them. One of the most beautiful aspects of New Orleans food culture and food scene are the people who make it happen. So all the stories about my mom and them, how we, are in the kitchen on Sundays, on graduations, on holidays, making food, and also some of the challenges that we have because we are also a community that supports each other. So please feel free to share your food-related stories on your social media accounts using the hashtag I Am New Orleans because we want to be in community with you to make our food systems more responsive to our needs. Now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have a beautiful lineup tonight. I'm so excited. And then we will watch a short video, which will help to bring some context to the conversation that we are having tonight. So on our panel, we have Ms. Jeanette Bell. Garden on Mars founder and expert gardener. Y'all, she has been in the game for a long time, a very long time, and we are blessed to have her wisdom. In 2003, Ms. Bell transformed a trash-filled lot into Garden on Mars. Her first garden was built on Mars Place, hence the name, Garden on Mars. She replicated this model in the lower Ninth Ward with 5 gardens on lots owned by the New Orleans Area Habitat for Humanity. So getting them hands in the soil are very important to her. Those lots produce flowers, herbs, fruit, and one acts as a mini market tool to teach people about neighborhood gardening. In 2015, Ms. Bell was awarded the People's Health Champion Award for her urban gardening efforts. She is definitely a champion of food access. And I am sure throughout the course of the night, you will be calling us into action, and we will definitely respond, Ms. Bell. Next on the panel is Jonshell from Grodat Youth Farm. I have the pleasure of working with Jonshell on a regular basis. She is one of our crew leaders and has been working at Grodat for a couple of years now. Beyond Grodat, Jonshell is a lover of nature and learning, and she has a desire to create an inclusive environment to foster justice and equality within our communities. Jonshell has also been in the game for a long minute. Don't let her age fool you. She is born and raised in New Orleans, and putting her communities first is of the utmost importance to her. And I have the pleasure of seeing that come to life every time we're at Grodat together. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, we have Angie and June Provost of Provost Farms. They are farmers in New Iberia. June came from 3 generations of sugarcane farmers and has been in the field all his life. At 18, he officially started working on his family's 2,500-acre farm. Angie is also a New Iberia native, and she traces her ancestry to the Cameroon coast, where her family was captured and sold as slaves to Louisiana sugar barons. That is a story that a lot of us can relate to in different ways. The Provost family, has intimate experiences with local food systems and the joys and inequities that come along with them. They fight the good fight, I love that, and work to provide insight about the industries that revolve around it. Y'all, we are blessed to have this panel. I'm excited because this panel represents all of the labors and the loves and the passions that go into our food systems. And this is how we will strengthen our food systems and make them more responsive. So I'm very, very excited to be in community with y'all tonight. And we will now go to our video. We're gonna have a second where we're gonna see a video that's gonna give us some context on New Orleans food systems. This is the official launch. So we hope that you find the video both inspiring and informational.
So New Orleans is known as a place for its culinary creativity and just like its food abundance. But in reality, there are a number of areas in New Orleans that, suffer from food inaccess and from food insecurity.
I consider the neighborhood I live in a food desert because there's nothing good to eat. We have like 12 different fast food restaurants like in our block.
There is a definite need for providing culturally relevant foods to people, and there is still a need for increased food access. This city, as beautiful and inspiring and rich and creative as it is, still has food deserts. And it is unfortunate that some of the young adults who are in our programs live in those areas.
You good? Delicious? Tell me.
Oh my God, that's perfect.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, my baby.
Five years ago, as I was getting my master's in public health, I made a decision that I wanted to have a better lifestyle for myself and for my son at the time. And it wasn't a goal of mine to start it as a business, but I saw where the need was.
And so we created clean course where there's 3 tiers of service here. Of course, the flagship where you can come in every day, you can get something hot made to order, or you can meal prep. You can subscribe to a weekly or monthly plan. It takes natives like us to believe in the community and to know we come from here. We know what we want. We know what we deserve, just like anybody in the city. And so that's kind of like our driving force to putting clean course in places like this.
We're able to really, really show this community what healthy food feels like, tastes like, and it's right around the corner.
I think it is very important that we discuss healthy food access. I think especially in the school setting, we have seen that if we can implement those changes with school meals where it's higher food quality standards, there's local procurement, and that the kids can get engaged, it's an opportunity for social emotional learning and mindfulness.
So Propeller has played a unique role in the healthy school foods movement. One of the reasons we decided to focus on school food is because we knew that for many kids, school lunch, breakfast, and snack made up over half of the calories in their daily caloric intake. And so if we could influence a big chunk of what they were eating, we believe that that would have an incredible impact in terms of children's health. One of the evaluation programs that the Kellogg Foundation funded at Propeller was the largest plate weight study of its kind in the entire country, where researchers came in and weighed before and after every school lunch plate to find out what were kids actually consuming. And food vendors were able to change their menus based on the research that we were able to get from those studies.
How can we really systemize or make part of the policies and the heartbeat of Head Starts and early care centers having fresh, healthy food? So we're working on also our farm to institution, trying to get fresh, healthy food into these larger institutions so that while they are feeding people, they're also kind of feeding the economy.
So essentially, the food service management companies had to improve their food quality. They had to procure at least 5% local. They had to use all whole grains, no trans fats, whole cuts of meat. By the next school year, the menus look completely different.
We're not as connected to our food sources as we used to be. A lot of those practices are lost, right? So part of what we're doing here is we're understanding our relationship to the land. And in understanding that relationship to the land and the history behind it, the production of food takes on like a whole new meaning.
I don't say I'm a youth leader. I don't say I'm an assistant crew leader. I always say I'm a farmer to start off, because this is the groundwork. So like being here and like being able to like learn these skills and be like, okay, I'm gonna like start planting food in like my backyard at home. And like I'm this person in my neighborhood and in my family who's like taking control of like what we're consuming and like what we're putting in our bodies.
I think Grow That exposes you to like those ideas and like have you critically think about ways that you can make an impact on a community. And that's what made me want to be a sociology major, because I want to go out in a community, I want to help people, and I want to eventually start my own nonprofit.
My hope is that their voices are regarded with as much power and force and confidence as those of people who hold positions of power, right, in the city. My hope is that they are resourced. My hope is that their needs are provided for. It is very difficult for a hungry stomach to do the other work that is necessary to create change.
I have to say, I've seen this video a couple times now in preparing for this event, and I still get a little choked up because I know people who are there are doing work that is extremely powerful. And food really has the ability to bring people together. Food also has the ability to to provide for people in a way that motivates them to change the other systems that are impacting them in their life. So yeah, let's, again, as we're going through this evening, please feel free, throw your comments in the chat. Let me know how you're thinking about the video that you just saw. And we will start with being very personal, right? So food is a very personal system. We really, there are timelines of our life that we can put to the foods that we eat in our lives, right? So there's New Year's Day, there are black-eyed peas and greens. For certain holidays, my mother, she makes ducks and rabbits, right? So there's a way in which food is extremely personal for all of us. So let's start there with the earliest memory of food that you have. If we can start with the Provost, let's talk about those earliest memories of food that you have.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being, allowing us to be here in this space with you all and have this discussion. I just want to say that, first of all, I think, Devon, for myself, the earliest memory of food that I have is not necessarily, I know I talked about this before, but not necessarily a particular type of food, but the transitioning from food from my grandparents' farm to moving to Houston and automatically having to eat boxed food and McDonald's and Burger King, whatever was closest to my parents' home. So for me, it was like pinpointing some particular food would be like transitioning from like cha-cha part, which is eggs and rice, right? And all of those types of things, and crawfish and cornbread, all of those things that we ate at my grandparents' home. Then transitioning when my parents were forced to relocate to Houston as a young child, I remember having to source our dinners and our meals from places like McDonald's or Dairy Queen. So yeah, that is sort of my earliest like memories of the types of food that I ate growing up at a very young age.
And for me, even though sugarcane is my family's legacy, I can remember as a little child, a little boy, just watching my dad grow okra and corn, sweet corn. I mean, we actually took our vacations as I became a teenager. We took our vacations by selling sweet corn on the side of the road. You know, we put all the corn in a wagon behind the tractor, and we actually sold the corn that way. So I remember that especially. I mean, even this year, we actually are growing 5 acres of sweet corn to actually give away to food banks, because it's special to us. I mean, I just know as a little child, just, you know, watching my dad and my family members pick okra and the corn was exciting for me, because I didn't have to pick it. I was just walking behind it, but it's exciting. And just, you know, that remembrance of the family is just, you know.
Yeah, I think our early memories of food are so tied to family, right? No matter the location, no matter where we are, food and family are sort of like intertwined with each other, and they're not mutually exclusive. They go together.
I hear you also talking about, so there's food and family, but you also made references to different parts of the food system very early on, right? So I remember as a child, my parents had gardens, but I always associated with the consumption end, right? I wasn't really active in the gardening, but certainly family and relationships were a core part of that. So for you, it's family, it's food, it's production, it's consumption, it's you're already bringing in a couple different aspects of our food systems. So Ms. Bell, what about you? What are some of the earliest memories that you have of food? We need you to unmute, Ms. Bell.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I grew up in Mississippi on 40 acres from during my elementary school years. And my uncle raised produce that was sold to the big market. You know, hundreds of pounds of cabbage and beans and potatoes and so forth. But between the fields, he planted fruit trees. And this was prior to the candy era, but I got to eat as many ripe peaches and ripe pears and ripe plums. And it didn't bother me that I didn't have candy because no one else had any candy, but I had incredibly wonderful fresh fruit. And when we had watermelons, they were ripened on the vine and they weren't picked and served. They weren't refrigerated, of course, back then. You went to the field and you picked a watermelon and you cut it, and everybody ate as much watermelon as they wanted, as much cantaloupe as they wanted, as much banana melon as they wanted. And of course, when the wild plums came along the roadside, we walked the roadside and picked and ate as many wild plums, sweet, delicious wild plums. And we went blackberry picking. And, you know, I always came home with fewer blackberries than I ate, you know. So I think when I think about food and my connection to food and my availability of food now, what I think about is the fact that the food that I have to purchase in the store is nothing compared to the fruit that I grew up with, which is why I have in my yard 4 pecan trees, 8 blueberry bushes, 3 blackberry bushes, and as much citrus as I can stuff in there, and it all ripens on the tree. I think that's a taste that if you had it as a child, you can't duplicate it as an adult from the store.
Absolutely. And I think between the three of you, y'all are making people hungry, because I'm looking at what folks are posting about in the chats. And in the chat, just references to like food that they had growing up, making people hungry, making me really ready for those summer peaches. And I think it's interesting that kind of like in my experience, like we always had enough, right? My parents had, you know, a very large family. We always had enough. And a lot of the stories that I'm hearing now, Ms. Bell, you're talking about some of that, some of the stark contrast. Growing up, we're speaking of abundance, and that is not everyone's reality, right? So part of it is an access issue. Part of it is just what is available issue. And your references to fruit, you know, ripening on the vine now, given our larger, the distance that we have between consumers and producers, we have fruits, you know, that are ripening in trucks. Right. So there is kind of like this stark difference that is emerging between what we're saying now and some of the realities for people today. So as we talk, I think that this is, again, I think this is the challenge of food systems, right? Food is something that brings us so much joy in many respects, and also could be a source of trauma for others. So just holding all of that in the space. I will invite everyone. You know, we have this intergenerational group of people on the panel, and we are reflective of, you know, a vast array of experiences and not all experiences. So please feel free to contribute what you feel called to do. In the chat, talk about your personal experiences, talk about those of your communities, because we understand that not everyone is represented on this panel. We want to make sure that everyone has space to speak to their experiences. So thinking about, because you already kind of alluded to it by saying, you know, this is how you were as children, how did those earlier experiences with food kind of shape your personal relationship to food in food systems as you were growing older? Whoever feels called to answer that.
I think for us though, like I can say that my early relationship to food is also a relationship to place, right? So with us growing up, food was always centered around either it was a badge of honor or either it was a critique on how to leave these rural environments that were like blocking us or giving us hurdles of bettering our lives, right? So I think that my early like inclinations about food or my early development or association with food was either it was this really great thing or it was associated with this land and this systemic racism that our parents and our grandparents said, you guys, it's too difficult here for you to prosper and grow and keep your lives healthy, that it's time for you to move away. And so those ideas and values have shifted for us, especially knowing the circumstances under which we were forced to relocate or move away. But I think that the early relationship for food is a bit conflicted, right? It's it has its like glorious things of eating fresh things from my grandparents' farm, but there's also the issue of the farm being subjected to either debt peonage or unscrupulous lenders or folks in the community trying to take that land away. So those issues with food are very broad. It's like I can't say that in just one clear sentence. It's a lot of things that surround it.
I mean, and for me too, I mean, it made me who I am today. I mean, not only knowing how to grow my food, but also selling it, you know, whether it's a commodity crop or produce, just having that business side of it. And like Angie said, I mean, we experience all parts of it, but it shaped who we are now. I mean, it really does.
Yeah, and also I have to say too, like dealing with issues of systemic racism. And I know we talk about food as in food deserts, but are they really deserts? Because deserts are actually very beautiful places. What we're experiencing is actually a form of segregation, right, within the food system. And so if we're talking about that, then we talk about our access to healthy food. And so I think that, like I was saying earlier, having to be forced to eat like McDonald's or Dairy Queen or whatever was like convenient for my parents to eat while they were working these like 80-hour-a-week jobs meant that food became a source of comfort, right? So it was an outlet for us to sort of take a break from all of the issues we were facing day to day, those traumas. So yeah, like getting to our relationship with food is very, it's a very complex issue. But knowing now what we know that healthy food, that foods that are so freshly prepared, that are properly sourced, can also be a healing aspect for us. But that is something that I think has to be developed further and developed more into a deeper conversation.
But I also just like to add to it, it made me appreciate the dirt.
Yes.
How crazy that might sound to some people, it really made me appreciate the dirt.
And the soil.
Yes, I mean, to get my hands dirty, like I say, is the best feeling in the world. So
yeah. And a healthy climate.
Absolutely. Ms. Bell?
I would like to say that my first connection to food motivates me as I move forward with Garden on Mars, because I started it with the idea that we could recreate the wonderful taste of fresh foods if we have them grown on the property where the person lives. It doesn't have to be grown in a field. It can be grown in a plastic pot that we are attempting to keep out of the landfill because we are putting too much plastic in the landfill. One of the things that Garden on Mars does is focuses heavily on the environment, and you don't need the wilderness to have blackberries, delicious sweet blackberries. You can grow blackberries in a pot on your porch in the same space that you originally grew a spider plant. Your house, when I walk through neighborhoods and I see porches littered with house plants or potted plants, I want to see those porches littered with food plants. And at Garden on Mars, we focus heavily on things that can be grown in containers where you don't have to worry about soil contamination. You don't have to use as much soil to begin with. You can use less organic soil to begin with. You can use less fertilizer. There's no digging, and you also use less water to produce food that can be allowed to be harvested when it's at its peak, not when it needs to go into an 18-wheeler for 7 days. It can be fresh. It can be fresh and ripe on your porch.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm hearing from both of you is kind of like this respect for the land, and our relationship to the land sometimes is very different if we're in a rural area where land appears to be more abundant and where land is not as abundant. Let's say if you have an apartment, if you have a house on a smaller parcel or what have. So there is still a respect for the land. And New Orleans certainly is faced with soil contamination issues, as are areas outside of the parish as well. I mean, let's just be real about that. We're in Louisiana. But I think just the ability to grow, regardless of the amount of land that you have, but land is still a critical issue, especially as we're going to talk about equity a little bit later. So I'm just going to put a pin in the land piece just for a second. We'll certainly have a chance to talk about that a little bit more. What I'd like to do now, folks, we are doing something new for the I Am New Orleans series, and that's using polling questions. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear about your relationship with food. So you're going to see a polling question pop up. I think there it is. Please take a couple seconds. How would you describe your relationship with food? We've had a chance for panelists to kind of share that. What are your thoughts? So please take a few seconds and vote. Wow, I love it. So most people have a cool relationship with food, a warm and comforting hug with the right amount of snug. I think I would place myself in that space as well. We have about a quarter of us having our ups and downs with food. A quarter of us are in a complicated relationship with food, and there are some of us who are, my relationship with food is a feeling wheel. For those of you who don't know what a feeling wheel is, it is literally a wheel of feelings, and they are all the feelings. So sometimes food has us going through all of the emotions, right? And I think in part because food is so connected to family, it's so connected to people. Let me say that. Food is very relational. And as relationships run a spectrum, so do our connections with food. I want to pull that thread a little bit more, because it's, as I think about food systems, right? Food systems are core to community building. They're core to not just our ability to live, although most definitely yes, but because food is so central to how we interact with people and how we build community, they're like what happens when food systems are not strong, right? And so I'm thinking about those informal networks and those formal food system networks. So let's talk a little bit about communities. And Ms. Bell, I am going to go to you and talk about how you see community relationships with food changing over time.
When I started working in the lower Ninth Ward, I knew that the most important thing for me to do was to do some research and find out what the food resources were in the beginning, and what was the history of the development of the area in which I was working. And I got such wonderful stories. I got stories about how everyone had their own chickens, how because of the lack of refrigeration, if someone went fishing and they had a good day, everyone who lived around them had fish for dinner. They all grew vegetables, and one person told me a wonderful story about how they accepted the fact that their neighbor had a pig. So in the beginning, there was a different relationship to food as the community developed. And what I felt that I needed to do was try to restore that relationship. I was working with people who grew up eating field peas and okra that was grown in their yard on their property. And so what we focused on is trying to bring back the culture. We, the mascot for our gardens in the lower Ninth Ward is the field pea, the Mississippi Crowder field pea. It's called Mississippi Crowder, and it's probably called some other state named Crowder in another state. But the story is that this pea came to America on the slave ships. And so I had some verification of this when I met the vice president of Slow Food International, when we met at a meeting and I had some field pea seedlings. He told me that throughout Central Africa, everyone eats this field pea, but they eat it differently. Some people eat it the way we eat lettuce, as a very fresh leaves. Some people eat it as fresh green peas, and some people eat it dried. Well, one of the things that I try to focus on is relaying this cultural information to the people in the neighborhood. And our project for this year is to do a little test. We have 100 okra plants that we will be giving to people in a neighborhood. And what we're saying to them is, very subtly, we want to teach them about seed saving. So we say, here's an okra plant, grow it and see if you like it. And if you like it, you only have to save one pod and you'll have enough seeds for next year. You can have a whole garden full of okra plants. And so what we're asking them to do is something that their ancestors did a long time ago. Because if you got some okra from the country, you saved a pod so that you'd have seeds for the next year.
And that practice of, harvesting seeds and saving them for another crop is certainly, like, that's sustainability, right? That's one piece of sustainability. And I have to mention that I was probably old enough to have probably figured it out sooner, but there are some GMO plants that are produced specifically so that you cannot reuse the seeds, right? So just being mindful of the way that our food systems are shaped, whether or not they are allowing for us to continue sustainable practices, whether or not they are allowing us, or they are encouraging or supporting us in maintaining those kinds of practices is just something important to note. So let's pull Jonshell, let's pull you back in, right? So you're talking about community, right? So Ms. Bell is talking about cultural practices and ensuring that across generations, people have an opportunity to maintain those practices. There's a continuous thread over time. How do you see your community's relationships with food?
Yeah, so I'm excited for this question because I am a young woman. And the recent responsibility of feeding myself has become more my responsibility than my mom and my grandma's, right? So thinking about that, my grandma would like seek side of the road vendors and go to like certain places in order to get food. And then as I've come to buy my own food, I look for that now. Like where are these side of the road vendors? Where are the fresh food, fresh markets, and where can I like make a relationship with local farmers? Interesting enough, since I went through Hurricane Katrina, a little bit of my relationship with food has been around like food pantries and like when people are giving away food or doing things like when there's a disaster or maybe low income families are like invited like once a month to come and get a Thanksgiving turkey or just those like canned goods, right? So I found it as I grew up, like our pantries would be full, but our stomachs wouldn't. Like the food wasn't anything that my grandma wanted to cook or anything that I wanted to eat. So instead of it being red beans, it was like kidney beans, lima beans, in abundance, because it was nice to have and look at. And preparing it was a different story, right? And as I come into buying my own food, I realized that that depending on what neighborhood I'm in, definitely determines like if I have like traveling access to food. So when I was walking to the store and biking to the store, I had like a limited capability of like bringing a lot of food home, right? So I see that when I was catching a bus, they had people who had their baskets ready, and I like learned through looking at my community, like how are people getting food back to their families, and in any type of way possible, really, right? Like whether it's carrying 30 bags or putting the 30 bags on the bike or bringing the basket on the bus. And I just have learned to see that people have their preferences, especially living in New Orleans, the lower ninth ward and in the east, like people had their preferences. So because there wasn't a Walmart in the east, and there are more like corner stores and small markets, just realizing that people had secrets, right? So like this store has this and that store has that, and being able to bargain shop. And that's something that I really want to bring up, is that I am trying to learn that now. Like Dollar General has rice for this price, and Winn-Dixie has rice for that price. And when I was growing up, there was flour bread and things like that, and knowing like what to keep in the house. So for me, it's a community is like the knowledge piece of how to eat, right? And like it just has shifted so much, because my grandma, from making flour bread, corn and rice, red beans and rice, everything with rice, changes a lot when I was in school, in cosmetology school, where there's more pressure to go to like a fast food place and things like that, because you're preparing your own stuff, you're more individual. So yeah, that's what I think about.
If I could pull a thread, because I know we talked about this before, and I think it would be important for everyone to hear. You focus a lot on culturally relevant foods too. That's something that's really important to you. So as we talk about community relationships with food, how important are culturally relevant foods to how communities participate in the food system?
Very important. when I brought up like food pantries and things like that, I'm thinking about like when people donate to food pantries, like what type of food are they donating? Are they donating good food, or are they donating food that they're not going to eat themselves, right? And giving that to whoever, you know, like is in need. And then that being translated to like recipes that I have grown up with: red beans, jambalaya, gumbo. Like different family had their different roles, right? So one person made the gumbo, one person made the salad or something else like that, right? And all of it came with their different tastes and personalities. And when I see those recipes in a box or like being commodified at Walmart or Winn-Dixie, etouffee even, like already prepared, all you gotta do is add some water and warm it up. I just think about how that just takes away from that, like preparing ingredients, chopping up the seasoning, chopping up the meats, and knowing what herbs are going into the food that you're preparing, right? When it comes dry and all you gotta do is add the water. So yeah, for me, it's about cooking, cooking just as essential as just having food, like how to prepare it and cooking it with your family and in your community, so that people can see that like food transforms, right? So it transforms from the soil to what's on your plate, and that being such a beautiful process to be a part of instead of letting it be microwaved.
Yeah, definitely. There is something that I really want to uplift what you said. You said the pantries are full in your house, but your stomachs weren't full, right? Just how important kinds of food are because they have such personal meaning. So when we talk about access is so connected to the kinds of foods that are available, not just in terms of quantity, right? Just like what's there, but really what speaks to a person. There are dishes that only my mama will make that I will eat. There are dishes that only foodstuffs that are found locally can be used to prepare it. So I think like that piece of the food system is, oh, well, folks can eat anything. No, not really. Not because food is more than just putting, vitamins A through Z in your body. There is this element of personal relationships. There is this element of family and community relationships. And when we see disruptions in the food system, there are implications, there are consequences beyond that. Now, the Provost, June and Angie, I know that y'all also speak to like culturally relevant food. Ms. Bell, you as well. So does anyone want to take on that question as well? Just the relationship, the need for culturally relevant foods so that we have thriving food systems and strong community relationships that come from that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think that we need to address here in having this conversation about food, right? So we're sitting here sponsored by Kellogg, right? We're sitting here, we're having a conversation around food when we're actually talking about a system that has been disrupted through cultural appropriation. So one of the things that we need to address first is that the food that we eat in South Louisiana has West African origins, right? So jollof is jambalaya, soup is gumbo, right? And so one of the other things that we have to talk about is that addressing that food access is actually trying to address wealth disparities, right? And the ever increasing wealth gap. People cannot afford to eat food if they don't have income. And so we have to really address those issues of getting the proper resources to folk so that they can be able to best suited choose the proper foods that they need for their community. And I think that one of the things that has happened is that we can talk about the informal systems of food, as you were speaking of earlier with Devon. Like for us, the informal food systems for us are Black and Indigenous folks of South Louisiana, right? We can go to every restaurant from below the Mississippi Valley, below the Mississippi Delta, and know that wherever we are, whether it's Brennan's or Grandma's Kitchen, we have sourced and created all of these recipes without having the ability to monetize our own artistic and creative endeavors. So I think that's a very important thing that we have to acknowledge. Another thing is that talking about the formal system. So June and I are farmers. We're multi-generational farmers. We are like third and fourth generation farm owners, but we're multi-generational farmers in the sense that our families have been farming since the days before emancipation, right? But the formal system of the formal like access or the formal system of the foodways has been hurdles and blocks to us. And so I think like in addressing those real issues, we've got to get to the real crux of the problem. And the crux of the problem really is wealth disparity and divisions and segregations within our community that still persist today. And so those things translate from urban and rural. I think it's just an issue that we all have to address and we all have to start talking about very openly.
You just said a full word. So Ms. Bell, get on in there and we'll come back. Ms. Bell.
All right, I'd like to say that I'm not from New Orleans, but one of the things that I have found that has been a little bit easy for me in getting people to talk about growing their own food is that because of the age of New Orleans, the foods that New Orleanians love were foods that were cooked and consumed prior to the development of 18-wheelers that brought food from California. So when you talk about gumbo zahab, you don't have to be concerned about whether or not you can go to some fancy store and find the ingredients, because as we know, that's a very delicious dish that is made from the greens from your garden, the 7 or 9 different greens from your garden. And if you want a little bit of shrimp or crab meat that's from your cousin who went shrimping or crabbing. So this is a wonderful component of getting New Orleanians back to foods that are healthy and wonderful and culturally significant.
Y'all have given us like a million threads to follow, which I love. We have a lot of love for local and regional foods that are coming up in the chat. Some questions about food pantries, some comments about culturally relevant foods coming up in the chat. There is so much, Angie, that you said in your word. There was so much that you said, because I often find that let's say we talk about food systems, we talk about the challenges within food systems, and the responses, the solutions focus on access, but in a way that provides for people to participate in a system that is inequitable, right? So right. There is we aren't questioning pricing, right? We're not questioning the lack of resources for people who want to grow their own foods, like farming on a large scale. So rarely do the conversations get to like the systemic parts of it. They're more, how do we get people to participate in a system? Like, right, it's the Band-Aid. So I hear your thread, I hear it, and feel free, to continue on this thread. And Ms. Bell and Jonshell, you're talking about the ability, like before people had vehicles, right? We grocery shopped outside. We made groceries outside. Ms. Bell, you and I talked about this, right? You made groceries outside. So if it wasn't outside, it wasn't meant to be in your meal, right? But there is a way in which providing for the land allowed us to continue that disruptions in land access and in land quality. And so we're seeing disruptions in other parts of the food system. So y'all, this is beautiful. And I'm thinking there is a place for us to talk about, because I think we'll soon be getting into the equity part of the conversation. Y'all are taking us there. quite naturally, if we can just take a minute to set up the next polling question, which is about inequities in the food system. I think this is a good place to go at this point, because we got our finger on the button, like we're ready to dial, right? Well, I guess I might be dating myself, but we're ready to move forward in talking about equity. So let's talk about, when thinking about our local food system, where are the most significant inequities? Because we will certainly take some time to talk about what we need to do. We need to throw the gauntlet and have some calls to action. So let's answer this question. When thinking about our local food system, where are the most significant inequities? Is it land? Is it fresh food? Is it capital to grow, distribute, and sell food? Is it skills and expertise? I'll give y'all a few seconds to weigh in. Y'all lock in those answers? Yes. So let's see what the people say. The people say that access to capital to grow, distribute, and sell food, that is the most challenging, the most significant inequity. I wonder how many farmers we have on the call. I wonder how many farmers we have on the call. I see some familiar names, and I know that they're growers, but we are still acknowledging that food access, that access to land, that skills and expertise are challenges as well. But the people have spoken and the people have said that capital to do the work that we feel called to do in food systems is the biggest, is the most significant inequity. Y'all, I see y'all are responding in the chat, and I'm gonna do my best to incorporate what you're saying here. Allison's hoping to be a farmer. Yes, Allison, you got some growers on this panel. You got some growers in the chat. We need to be connecting. We need to be connecting, because the more we can grow locally, the more we can support the other aspects of our food systems. So let's talk a little bit about where we were going before the last question, and talking about these systemic inequities. I don't want to be so general as to say, why do they exist? But let's talk a little bit about how they are perpetuated. Maybe we can go there. If we have poor access, if we have a lack of capital to do the work that we feel called to do for our food systems, if there is not enough land to grow, how are these? Because I think the why is I think something that we all may already know, that may be, like, we might be preaching to the choir. But let's talk a little bit about how, because if we move into our, like the next segment, talking about solutions or how we respond to inequities, let's talk a little bit about how these inequities are perpetuated. I do want to acknowledge something that came up earlier in the chat about food pantries. The comments are a little bit further down the chat box. I can't pull them all up, but there is something, I think, to what you said earlier, Jonshell, about food pantries. Like, how does food get into food pantries? And, you know, when people make donations, which is beautiful, thank you for your donations. And for the person who is on the getting end, you know, how to make those cultural connections. So let's talk a little bit about how these inequities are perpetuated. Does anybody want to take it?
I'd like to say that with regard to the pantry, Garden on Mars recently had their students, Tulane students, harvest 25 bags of fresh greens from the original Garden on Mars. And we took them to a pantry. And when we got to the pantry, I was surprised, and the students were surprised to find out that our donation was the only freshly harvested donation there. And it was almost as if you were being attacked by chemicals. Everything was processed. It was in a can, and you felt like you wanted to check the label to see, when it would expire. But everything was so processed. I felt like we are giving people who are less healthy to begin with even more less healthy foods. And it made me even more determined to try to work a relationship with this pantry, because next week I'll have 25 more bags of greens that I can donate to them. But they're so busy shelving and handling these boxes and boxes of donated processed foods. There's no volunteer that can come out and help us harvest all of these greens that I am growing, that I'm happy to donate. And what I want to see is, I want to see us think differently about what should be donated to pantries, because we want to help. And in order for us to help, let us take some of these thousands of vacant, blighted lots in the city and start growing on them, so that the food that's grown on them can go to these pantries, so we can level out the food that's being handed out to people in need.
That's another full word. I want to take, Ms. Bell, you made me think of the community fridges, right? So over the course of the past year, there have been a number of community folk who have been setting up community fridges throughout the city. I don't know if they're above 17, if anyone in the audience has intimate experience working with the community fridges, then please put that information in the chat. But community fridges are there in part because they saw the gap in need. Thaddeus and Tamara Prosper commented that food pantries, like the food banks, don't have the capacity to store fresh produce. They don't have the capacity to store fresh foods. What they have is the capacity to store staples. And so that could certainly be part of what we are seeing here. So, and people have said, we thank you, food banks, and people still need fresh foods. So they put community fridges throughout the city. And so that is a necessary, immediate, short-term intervention, right? And we are asking people who already don't have resources to respond to the challenges that are brought to us by big corporations, right? Which brings us back to Angie and June's point about the system itself, right? When are we going to take a look at the system itself? If y'all want to speak a bit to like some of those broader systemic challenges, because I think this is communities, we are going to take care of each other. We are resilient, we are creative, we are innovative, we are all the things, and all the things are tiring. We are asking people who do not have resources to pick up the slack for individuals who do and corporations who do. And so that is, we are all the beautiful things, and it's tiring, right? So we have community fridges, we have those pieces. Let's talk a little bit more about those systemic challenges.
I think for us too, like in going back to your question, is like what inequities, like what perpetuates these inequities. I just want to make it very clear to everyone that it's poor policy that's perpetuating inequities, right? So when you think of the civil rights laws that are on the books, I want you to readjust your mindset to think of them as human rights laws and see if they really are something that is suitable for your lifestyle, for you to live a whole, happy life as a human being. And we will find that many of them are not. And so thinking about these things, also thinking about how we use the word inclusion quite often. It's used freely. But do we want to be included in a system that is so abusive to so many people, or do we want to be innovative, right? So thinking about innovation in policy and technology and all of these things that are governing us in our system, we also need to be very aware of how things are funded, right? So like talking about how we grow food, how we market food, many of us are not connected to the laws and the guidelines that are regulated by the Commodity Credit Corporation, right? We think of that as just things as like, oh, these big farmers in the Midwest, when actually the USDA is regulating a whole lot of stuff that's happening in our everyday lives that we're just not really informed about. And we really need to get associated with all of those laws that we think need improvement and reform to make sure that we're able to market our products. I just want to give you guys an example. So when June and I were going through our most difficult times, many folks had said, well, you just farm too many acres, right? Or you need to transition to produce, right? And so those are the things that I think are such racist tropes that we don't really acknowledge on a day-to-day basis. And it also doesn't address that produce farmers face a hell of a lot of backlash, especially Black and brown produce farmers. Because what are you going to do when you take your peppers to Trapeze or wherever it is, and they're not weighing your product correctly, right? What are you going to do when you have to donate something, but you don't have an accountant or a books person that can keep a record of all the donations you're doing for your business, right? To make sure that you stay afloat. So all of those things are hurdles and issues that I think we need to address in the system of what we like to call civil rights or commercial lending rights or consumer lending rights. I think some of those things actually need a particular like magnifying glass on by our people to understand what's really happening here. And it's a very complex issue, but it really starts with poor policy. We have a lot of outdated policies that really need to be adjusted and reformed for a modern and better day for us all.
Thank you very much for saying that, because one of the things that I feel very strongly about is the fact that there is not support for locally grown items. For example, New Orleans is the only tourist city that I know of where you cannot grow and sell flowers on the streets. If you've ever gone to Hawaii, you know as soon as you step off the plane, there's someone there to sell you a lei, but there's no one checking to see if they paid their taxes, if they have a license, or anything like that. And I can assure you, because I've been there, that those leis were grown from flowers in their yard, and they can buy a lei needle at the pharmacy at the checkout counter next to the National Enquirer, and they can go home and make leis from flowers in their yard and walk down to the airport and start selling them, and no one's going to bother them. We need to stop preventing our low-income families from benefiting from what can be produced in this city, in this state.
That is so correct, Ms. Bell. And that goes to the point that our access and our abilities to market what we grow on our land is directly correlated to the wealth inequality that we see ever exponentially growing in this country, right? And so that is so important. That is like, yeah, you're so correct. Yes.
Dropping full words. Jonshell, we talked before about the ability to grow, because there is a way in which this conversation can happen on a really large scale, right, as it should, and to drive the point home. So what does it mean, like for Ms. Bell, what does it mean for people to be able to, within their own circumstances, become entrepreneurs, right, have the basic resources that they need? And so Jonshell, you and I have talked before about the ability to grow in your own space, the possibility, the probability, the likelihood that that happens. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to say the first thing that was on my head as the other panelists are talking, especially about like low income and food access. A short story that the biggest slap in my face that I've ever felt, as far as like local government wise, is being a woman on WIC with a brand new baby, and the fruit and veggie voucher that they gave me was $8. I had $8 as a breastfeeding mom to feed myself and to feed my new baby. And there was the other things I wanted was like a certain type of beans that I can get out the store, a certain type of bland cereal, 1% milk. And then that just being like, well, because you're low income, this is like what you need in order to like live for tomorrow, but definitely not thrive, right? So yeah, seeking help from local government and then being told, well, all we got is $8 for you, was just horrendous. And yeah, when I'm thinking about the question at hand, I have probably, even though I've lived in New Orleans my entire life, I haven't lived in the same home for more than 2 years, maybe a year and a half at most, right? So even if I would say my grandma, because that's who I live with the most. Even if my grandma did want to grow, she was moving the next year. And then when I was with my mom, it's the same thing. Low income housing being taken away from you, things just happening in the city, and yeah, just not having the stability to be able to grow like at your home, right? And then now that I have my own home, I realize that because I'm renting, if my landlord comes and see me growing things up her side of her house or next to her wonderful flower bushes, there's tension there, that I feel like definitely shouldn't. And I understand it because it's not my property, right? So that it has been the struggle that I've seen, as far as being independent and about to have another baby in July. You know, like how am I going to feed these little bitty mouths who don't know how to grow their own crops, right? And for me to not have my own land to be able to show them, right? So my first job ever was at a community garden, and learning how to like respect the soil and learning that there are small ways in order to be resilient, right? And those constant battles that I'm having within my community, but due to just being impoverished and yeah, just not being able to go next door to the candy lady, you know, like how we used to do when I was a girl, right? Like those types of relationships aren't really there anymore as far as going to your neighbor's house and eating with them, right? It's more about if it's in your house, that's how you eating, right? So I just think a lot about stability, about how that like income, what Angie was saying, just income inequity in general is the biggest hurdle, stopping people from being able to eat what they want. And then after what they want, teaching them how to eat what's healthy for them and what's going to keep them alive, right? So I just think about, government assistance being very awful, which is a part of that policy piece. And then like the everyday struggle of especially feeding small children from my perspective. You know, I can't always get them to eat green beans and stuff like that, you know, in the first year and two. But having the ability to show them that it came from somewhere and that we can cook it together and you can eat it like this, you know, I feel like it's so magical.
Yeah. So certainly the challenges are coming from the policy sphere, coming from the systemic sphere, and like these other kind of like more closer to home challenges, in that there are restrictions in leases. There is kind of like poor access. You know, the number of people who I've talked to who, because it was difficult for them to cut the grass in their yard, they cemented everything, right? So I think that there are kind of like layers to the challenges that our food systems are facing. Thank you all for sharing all of this. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we got 10 minutes left, y'all. We got 10 minutes left. And in this time, I'm seeing what people are saying in the chat about WIC. Yep, Jonshell, you said a word. You know, WIC can be demeaning, most definitely, insufficient, most definitely, requiring policy change, most definitely. So these are the words that y'all are speaking. People in the audience, and this is a call for myself as well, we need to be active. We are issuing these calls to action, right? And Ms. Bell, I'm thinking about you, and earlier today, you were like, time is too short. Time is too short, and we need to act now. Now is the time to act. So let me ask y'all this. We know the challenges that are here, right? Are there projects? Are there responses, solutions to fixing our food systems that are bringing you hope, that are bringing you joy, that are making you think like all the blood, sweat, and tears that I've shed over the past couple of years are not for naught? What in terms of how people are responding, what is bringing you joy? What is bringing you hope? What is lighting that fire to act?
May I say something
Of course.
that is not directly addressing that, but I think needs to be said? There is too much lack of respect for people in need in this city. Our politicians ignore the people in need because we don't contribute to their campaigns, their political campaigns. And they tend to respond to their contributors as if the people like Jonshell don't deserve respect. She deserves as much respect as anyone else. We all deserve the same amount of respect. And let us be clear about what COVID has shown us. COVID has shown us the disparity in treatment in this society. Let's not allow it to be swept under the rug anymore. Let us step up and ask the people in charge, when the question of land comes up and they want to say, oh, there isn't land available. Are you kidding me? There are hundreds of vacant lots in the lower Ninth Ward that are being cut at the expense of taxpayers, and they don't want that land used by people to grow food. That needs to be stopped, and it needs to be stopped now.
I'm gonna take that as that call to action.
That call, let's do it.
That is the call to action. All I can say is yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Oh, and you have some love coming in the chat saying absolutely. The vacant lots are that they can certainly be repurposed in more meaningful ways.
Well, I want to add to the question, which is like I'm gonna shout out GrowDad, my current job, that I feel like sharing knowledge with young people who are willing to listen has been like the greatest thing that I've done in my adult like career choice, I guess, at this point. I have worked with little bitty babies that are like 5 who are like, oh, that's a strawberry, oh, that's a potato. And then I work with elders who are like, hey, I might need to use less salt, like when I'm making my recipes, right? And right now, we're currently working with teenagers, just understanding that because the world is so different, their ideas are so fresh, and like being able to bring it home to their parents and just change perspectives story by story and by what they're learning has just been very inspiring for me to be a part of. And just every day, just seeing them get more and more comfortable with the soil, with insects, with learning about indigenous plants, learning about our climate, learning about how it's changing all the time, and we as humans are all a part of that like change, right? So no matter if you know about it or not, like it's about putting yourself in places where you can, be in that conversation. And start making that change. And I just am inspired by the young people that come through GrowDat, and the young people who I've worked with along the years who are taking initiative to be like, hey, like I didn't know this before, but what I know now, I'm using that knowledge to tell my grandparents, like, hey, we can do this differently. Tell my parents we can do this differently. And as they raise their children, as I'm raising my own, like this is what I'm specifically going to do differently, like, and just carrying that, generationally, in the way that we're all being kind of forced to carry like our poverty generationally. So yeah, that's what I want to add.
Angie and June, can we get y'all in 30 seconds? I guess one more polling question I want to fill in.
Okay, yeah. So we're so hopeful and encouraged by everything that's coming out of New Orleans, especially GrowDat. Like you guys provide a great example for us on what we need to see here outside of New Orleans in rural communities. I think it's very important that you guys understand that it's not just about what you're growing on the land, but it's about what you're growing in people's minds. And so it's about the conversation that's being started. And so like, just shout out to like River Green Queen, Sprout, GrowDat, everybody. We're super excited about what we see happening. And we just all got to be part of this movement of getting food equity.
And it is nothing more special than when somebody reaches out to you and asks you how to grow a simple plant.
Yeah, that's hope.
That's hope. Joy. To get your hands dirty and to see that seed pop up into something is the best feeling in the world. So
yeah.
Absolutely. And y'all got some love too. There's some love coming for y'all in the chat too. Y'all, we got one last polling question. This is helping us to keep the conversation going. This question is about the food conversations that you want to hear about in the future. So if you can take a few seconds to answer, what food equity conversations should we discuss next? Food equity and climate change, funding food equity, young leaders shaping food equity. Please answer. And if there are other conversations that you want to have, but they're not here on this list, please put them in the chat. I will be reading the chat. I will be sourcing the chat for ideas and inspiration and questions and all of that. So please respond to the poll, put some additional comments in the chat. I will read them all. Funding food equity. Funding food equity. I think you put that, you dropped that seed, Angie, with your comments. So I know people are already thinking about it. Food equity and climate change, a couple people there. Young leaders shaping food equity, a couple people there. Some folks want to select all of the above. Yes, all of the above is an option. We can take that too. Y'all, we have 1 minute left. And in that minute, I want to just tell you how grateful I am that I spent my Thursday evening with all of you. Inspiring, inspiring, inspiring. So I hope everyone in the audience, y'all have a lot to reflect on. Y'all have a lot to act and do, because time, like land, are very precious. So please use the time that we have to improve our food systems, because we got at least 4 people, 5 people working here on the screen making this happen. So please take some time. Thank y'all for being here. And there will be another I Am New Orleans conversation in a few weeks. So please be on the lookout for there. A recording of this video will also be available on the IamNewOrleansVoices.com page, as well as additional resources about the lovely people here, how you can act. Y'all, let's just please keep this conversation going. Now is the time. Good night, everyone.